Content warning. This podcast episode contains discussions of a sensitive nature that may be triggering for some individuals.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. My name is Dee Moore, and I am a kidney warrior. This podcast is dedicated to encourage, educate, and inspire as we explore all aspects of kidney disease, related chronic illnesses, and health. In today's episode, I am bringing you a kidney warrior story. Now, there's always something you can learn from someone's story, something that can bring inspiration and hope. My guest today from London, England, is Rachel Staunton, a musician and a married mom of 2 boys. Rachel is a woman of faith who loves dining out and has a passion for skiing. In this episode, Rachel opens up in a truly heartfelt conversation. Her story is one of strength, perseverance, and hope, and it's one that's sure to leave you inspired. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss it. Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Rachel?
I am really well, thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm meeting kidney royalty in meeting you. So thank you for having me here.
Wow, thank you. That's the first time someone said that to me. Thank you so much. It really is. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to meet you. This interview has been a long time coming, actually, because we met each other online a while ago and we've been saying about doing this interview. So I'm really, really glad that we're finally here and I get the opportunity to hear your story. And as I say to people every single time, but I really do mean it, there's so much that you can learn from someone's story. Living with CKD and all that happens along the journey, there's so much that you can learn. So I'm really, really, really excited to be interviewing you today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, because I think I've listened to nearly every episode of Diary of a Kidney Warrior over the last couple of years, not exaggerating. And I personally, a couple of years I reached out to you to say thank you so much for this podcast, because I feel like pretty much everything I've learned about CKD has been through this podcast, and it's definitely walked with me in the ups and downs of my own personal journey. So thank you to all the people who've contributed to this, who've gone before. It's definitely had a big impact on me, and I'm very grateful.
Oh, wow. That's truly an honor. Thank you. That's really kind of you to say. And thank you. I mean, this is what this podcast about. This is what the heart of this podcast is about: helping, empowering, and encouraging people. So I'm glad to be part of your journey in that way and playing a small part in helping. So thank you so much. Right. After that, wow, that wonderful introduction. Wow. Honestly, I feel so honored and humbled by what you've said. And yeah, so I really want to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your kidney warrior journey begin? And how were you diagnosed?
Good question. So when I was about 2, my great-grandfather, who was about 90, I was visiting his care home, and he dropped loads of his tablets on the floor, and my parents didn't know if I'd eaten some of them or not. So I went for a checkup at the hospital, and they said, oh, she's got a bit of blood and protein in the urine, but we don't know whether that's to do with taking her great-granddad's water tablets or not, or whatever. So anyway, with a bit of follow-up, I think they realised that actually I did have bit of a problem right from when I was young with my kidneys, which I now think is probably hereditary, if that's the right word, through some of my relatives as well. So I've kind of known throughout my whole childhood, I would go for random checkups and things like that at children's hospitals and blood tests and all of those things. Doing the 24-hour urine collection was a particular highlight of my childhood. I'm so glad the technology moved on a lot since then. But yeah, I remember having to take like random containers to school. I don't think this is where the podcast was meant to be going, but my mum would send me to school with a crazy bottle in like a case where, you had to collect your whole 24-hour urine sample and then take it into the hospital the next day. So I've kind of grown up thinking those things were relatively normal. But I think then really knowing that I had more of a chronic kidney disease was more like when I was in my 20s, I'd say.
So from a young age, you became aware there was an issue regarding your kidneys, but you hadn't actually been diagnosed with the disease, or were you in the early stages of the disease then?
I think I was in the early stage of the disease, but actually all through my teenage years and into my 20s, I did have pretty good kidney function. So it wasn't something that was concerning me. I didn't really think a lot about it. I especially didn't think longer term what the implications might be. So yeah, I had no idea in a certain way what was around the corner.
So as a child then, aside from having to do these 24-hour urine collections, was there any other impact by CKD, or did you just live a normal, in speech marks, life at that time?
Yeah, I very much lived a normal life, very active child, doing lots of music and drama and dancing and the like. And around 16, they said, we're not quite sure what's going on. So I did have a biopsy at that age, which confirmed that I had, I think they called it non-specific nephritis or something like that.
And did you have an understanding of what that was? Did the diagnosis make any difference at all to your life at that time? Did you have to make any dietary changes or changes to your life?
No, I think they've always encouraged me to drink a lot of water, which I've always done. That's never really been a problem because I've always felt thirsty and I think my body was just telling me to do that anyway. I would say that until my kind of mid-20s, where unfortunately I did get sepsis one time while I was away with work, really I'd had pretty stable results. And so everything was looking fine. And then I got septicemia, which is kind of blood poisoning, if you like. I had a first infection and then I had a second infection and then that went into my blood. I was really, really unwell. And I think one of the outcomes of that was that I kind of lost around 10% more of my kidney function. So that was the first kind of little dive that it had. And then really after that, I was pregnant with my first child, who's now 10. And it was really in the pregnancy that the drama kind of ramped up as my kidneys didn't cope very well with being pregnant. I had amazing, amazing care at Guy's and St Thomas's, both the kind of renal department from Guy's and then the people dealing with more the pregnancy side at St Thomas's. Just felt very, very well supported by an amazing team of consultants who linked up really well and kind of really cared for me. But I think in that pregnancy, I did have 60 days or overnight stays in hospital, with a few kind of nerve-wracking moments where they were maybe just going to have to kind of emergency take the baby out. And then a couple of the other things that happened is like, you get fluid everywhere when your kidneys are not working very well. So it's kind of, when I was pregnant, it's really a fine balance between the health of the baby and the well-being of the baby and wanting the baby to be in as long as possible, but them kind of knowing the longer that continues, the more fallout there is potentially from your kidney function. So that's kind of the way I understood it at the time. And it became clear after that pregnancy that I'd lost around another 30% of my overall kidney function.
Wow.
Then,
So to this point, then, you lost 40% in total of your kidney function.
Yeah.
Wow.
From those two kind of in 1 year from that. But still, I wasn't really panicking. I didn't really know what EGFR was about. I didn't know. I wasn't looking at my results. We didn't have my chart, or I wasn't that conscious of it. I knew that I'd been quite unwell during the pregnancy. But yeah, I feel like I was well supported and looked after during all of that. And my son nearly got to term, had to have him a few weeks premature, but that was pretty miraculous. And then I had a second pregnancy, which is my boy who's 8 now. And unfortunately, even earlier, it got tricky, really, with my kidneys really struggling quite early on in the pregnancy and kind of the risk of preeclampsia, given that I would have the levels that would indicate preeclampsia really early on in the pregnancy in the first kind of few weeks. So that gave them very little ground to judge if things were safely progressing or not. I'm not a medic, I'm a musician. So this is my kind of experience or take on it, if you like. So actually 9 weeks premature, they said, actually, I'm going to have an induction and take the baby out at this point. So, I mean, by the grace of God and pretty miraculous, my little boy who's 8, is firing on all cylinders and doing brilliantly. But it was it was an up and down time, and it's very nerve-wracking when not only your own life is at risk, but also that of your unborn child, and juggling a toddler at the same time as having kind of premature baby in hospital and recovering yourself. I remember one day after I'd had the baby, I'd been in hospital 9 days myself, and the consultant had said, "I'm not letting you home until your creatine's below 200. Well, it turned out to take a whole other year for that to happen. So I was glad that they did let me home. But yeah, I didn't really understand those numbers at all. I would say I was pretty naive, doing what I was told by the hospital, but not really aware fully of the impact that that would have on my kind of ongoing kidney disease. So again, like that pregnancy lost around another 30%. So by this point, I was more around the like EGFR 30 kind of level. Once I got over the pregnancy with no signs of feeling unwell or tired or anything. So I was kind of fully functioning totally fine, I would say.
So rewinding slightly, you had your first child, and during that pregnancy, your kidney function dropped by 40%. So after you had your son, did you gain back any kidney function at all, or did it remain the same?
No, it remained the same. So with the sepsis and the first pregnancy, 40% had gone in total there. And then the same after the next pregnancy again, like 30 had just gone and it didn't come back in any way.
So I have to ask this question because, you know, on this podcast, we're not scared to ask the more difficult questions. But after going through that experience with your first pregnancy and losing a significant amount of kidney function, did they speak with you before about future pregnancies, that this could happen again?
Yeah, they definitely did. I had this appointment to go to called pre-pregnancy counselling, which sounded as weird as it was, actually. It felt like you had to go as a couple and request, like, could we try for another baby? Which is just a bizarre room to be in. My husband was like, oh, what's going on? So, yeah, we did go to that session where actually then interdisciplinary consultants discuss your case and your levels. I think what was missing from my kind of knowledge base at that time was any understanding about what these numbers meant and what the future of those numbers could mean. I had no perspective, if you like. So in my head, I was like, that's gone well with that pregnancy eventually. I'd love to have another child, so I'm sure that will go well eventually, which it did. And I'm super blessed with two amazing kids, which, you know, I really acknowledge a lot of people with kidney problems cannot have any children. So in that sense, like I feel very, very blessed. And it was worth it. And you might think after having one where it'd all gone quite dicey and I was in hospital a lot, it'd be easy to think like, why would you go there again? But I definitely felt very blessed in that situation to have a second child and wouldn't change it for the world.
So as a mother that's had 2 successful pregnancies whilst having CKD, what advice do you have for somebody who's living with CKD and is considering pregnancy and is worried about what may happen during those pregnancies?
I would say be guided by the experts. You've got to really listen to the advice. I think if I had my time again in this scenario, I would have equipped myself with more knowledge about, you know, the potential way this would head for me. Because putting it bluntly, if I hadn't had 2 children, maybe that could have been another 10 years before being on dialysis, or, you know, who knows? You don't know, and nobody's promised the next day. But yeah, I think doing things like listening to your podcast, just upskilling yourself, understand what all those numbers mean. Like we have amazing apps now where you can see almost in real time all your results. And I'd say over the past sort of 6 months, having that kind of knowledge has really been a game changer for me. And I think, you know, in your podcast, you talk a lot about advocating for yourself. I think actually, you know, I was more naive then and didn't know what questions to ask or didn't know what I didn't know. So I would say, yeah, knowledge and kind of understanding and not being afraid to ask questions about, like, what does this mean for me longer term? What could the impact be on me, or what could the impact be on my potential child? Or I think they're really legitimate questions to ask and things that I probably would have liked to have known the answers to if I had a time again.
So you mentioned before that after you had your children, even though you'd lost that amount of kidney function, that you didn't have any symptoms. So what was life like after then?
Life was totally full. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a musician. So that means rehearsals, late night concerts, tours, residentials. And I work a lot with young people, which is my absolute joy. So the schedule was quite full with two little ones and sort of always buzzing around, every day being different, every week being different. And really had no problem. I'm quite a high energy person, I would say, as a character. I've always been energetic. I always cram more things into the day than the next person somehow. I'm just one of those people. So I would say life was really good, still going to the hospital maybe every couple of months or something like that. I was going to volunteer at the kids' Christmas fete because obviously I had 17 Christmas concerts and thought in the one afternoon I had off, I would squeeze that in. And I remember getting a message from the hospital saying, oh dear, your kidney function's gone from 30-ish to 19. And I was like, what? 19? And then I sort of did a bit more digging and realized, I think this is right, that it's almost like a percentage EGFR. I know it's not an exact percentage, but I was thinking, 19? That doesn't sound good. What happens? Why has it gone down like that with no symptom, no infection, no trigger that I could lean on, if you like? And I think that's the first moment where I thought, hang on a minute, where's this leading? And what time frame is this leading there on? So I did say to the doctor, I know you don't have a crystal ball. What is your best guess here? Tell me about dialysis. Tell me about kidney transplants. I know nothing. At what point do you intervene here? Because 19's not sounding great. But at the same time, saying to him or her, there's got male and female consultants, saying to them, I feel fine. Almost I had to be convinced that there's a problem at that point. Whereas, of course, in the pregnancies, it was obvious as a problem. My face was puffed up. I was struggling to breathe. I was getting out of breath. My ankles, size of elephant ankles, all those kind of symptoms. So this time, I was kind of quickly put into some new appointments. It was, you need to see this person at this clinic now. I feel like you go through the week, through the different clinics. Monday feels like a more urgent clinic. So the days back you're moved, you think, hang on a minute. I'm in the Tuesdays now. I was in the Wednesdays a couple of months ago. So, yeah, and I remember going to one appointment, instead of checking with the nurse. So I thought, okay, fine. And I took my young kids to the waiting room. Absolute comedy show. One of them is flooded the whole table of kidney flyers with the water machine. Great. Waiting there over an hour, keeping everyone entertained. One of them was playing Skittles with the urine pot.
Children.
So, children, oh joy. And then I went into this appointment, like armed with young children, and the nurse says, oh, well, this is the appointment where we tell you about all the types of treatment, and you make your kind of decisions about what your preferences are. And I was taken aback. I was like, what? And then there's this big folder with photos of all these different things. There's fistulas, there's necklines, there's stomach lines or whatever, all these things I'd never heard of, Dee. I'd never seen, I'd never heard of. And I was there with my kids, and my kids are looking like, what's going on here? And it was a little bit traumatic, to be honest, that appointment, because it was like going from 0 to 100. I had no idea that was coming down the line almost. Even, I know it sounds strange because I'm telling you, I've got CKD since I was 2. But it's funny how little you take in until it gets closer to the kind of deadline, as it were.
I think that although they know that you've known since you were little, the fact that you arrived there with your children and didn't show that sensitivity to say, oh, actually, we're going to be talking about some things that may be difficult for you to hear, and maybe we can rearrange this for when you haven't got your children with you, and do it that way, just to show that compassion and empathy, to be happy to discuss that in that situation it's just so wrong. It's so insensitive.
Yeah, and I think they maybe thought that I knew what that was about, and I just didn't, or I got the wrong end of the stick. But yeah, there are a few moments like that where you don't know what's coming down the line, and it can be quite impactful news that they're sharing with you. And you wish actually, I wish I brought my partner so he could hear that or understand that with me. Or I go into a bit of a mode in appointments where I'm not really that good at concentrating, and all the jargon kind of goes over my head. So then I'll go back to my husband and they say, well, what did they say? And I say, I think everything's all right-ish, you know. So I can only think for people who maybe, English is second language or third language, or who have additional needs, this must be really complicated to kind of get their heads around. Because I think even as a young kind of fit person, it feels like a lot. You're suddenly faced with a bit of a change of direction, I'd say, for your future, which is quite a lot to take in.
You're sitting there, they're explaining all these new and complicated things to you. You're sat there with your children trying to take in this information. How did the meeting progress? Did you make any decisions at that time, or were you given time to kind of think about it?
I was given time to think about it. But again, I didn't really realise, even in sort of declaring what my apparent decisions were the following week, I didn't realise that they would sort of hold true. Suddenly I was getting questions, do you know if there are any people in your family who might come forward to donate you a kidney? And you just sort of like, I think I was chatting with you the other day when I said it's not the sort of thing you create a WhatsApp group for, with a little picture of a kidney going, hi, family and friends. Anybody? Anybody fancy giving me one of their organs? It's a hard one to even broach with your family. And at the same time, you're trying to take on the information that's quite life-changing for you, process that, and then quickly try and turn around. Oh, well, if I go on dialysis, which type of dialysis would I like to do? Not really knowing much about any of the types. Or do you want to go on the deceased donor list? Because by this point, it's 15% EGFR in the hospital I'm at. And so I'm sort of going, yes, I think so. I think that sounds wise. Yes, please add me to the list. Oh, well, would you accept a kidney from someone who X? Would you accept a kidney from someone who Y? And there's all this kind of barrage of questions. Yeah, I found that stage pretty full on, particularly for me because it was going quite quickly all of a sudden after a very slow run into this bit, and every time I was going there, it was a couple less. And around sort of 9, they said, at this point, sorry, I should backtrack a little bit to say my amazing sisters and mum, all 3 came forward to see if they were a match, which was, even in itself, quite an amazing thing to process. That, like, my sisters had newborn babies at the time. The thought that they would even come forward, make the time to go to hospital, do a test, that was pretty amazing. And my mum, and actually I later found out one of my friends didn't tell me they were going forward and went forward, which again, I was really moved by. And of those 4 people, and I felt very privileged that 4 people would go and even consider that. It's such a big thing. My sisters weren't a match, and they're twins. They're 2 years younger than me, but they didn't prove to be a match because they're a different blood group. Same with my friend. But my mum proved to be a pretty solid match, which in a way, none of us were expecting. Because in my head, it was like, well, I've got these twin sisters who are really similar in age and young and all of those things. And then, lo and behold, a miracle match is found in my own mum. So that was all kind of a lot to take on. So when I was around, from 15 downwards, they were doing the bit of the workup process to my mum. And I would say at this point, like, it's a very interesting process to be going through where your health is declining. Someone is doing a very sacrificial process for you, which could be your lifeline. Processing that process together is a nuanced thing, because you're so grateful, you're living with the gratitude and hope that that person is providing you, but you're also seeing there's some tough things that they're having to go through, and there's tough things you're having to go through, because without that, you're going to die. Without some intervention, it's game over. So kind of getting your head around all of that is quite complicated. And I think in my family, for my sisters and for my dad, it is a big deal. Essentially, your wife is going to go under a massive operation for your daughter. It's a miraculous thing about transplant, and it's a completely unique scenario you find yourself in, or you find yourself walking through, or that you have the privilege to walk through if you have a match or you have a living donor. So yeah, that was all kind of going on. The workup process was going, and we decided actually, if we possibly could, a preemptive transplant would just be great. that would be amazing. Organised, thought through, prepared for, planned, all tests done in advance. And my mum, bless her, she had to have a biopsy as well of her kidney. They just wanted to check something out. She had so many tests in the workup phase. Again, we had no idea. Like, you feel like you're going a day at a time. You're finding out, oh, now she has to do this. Oh, now she needs to wear a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. Oh, now she needs to do this scan. Now she needs to. And the same for you as well, because it's like you have to have heart checks and check scans of your veins in your legs, and like things you just never thought of or heard of. But we were both kind of going through all those tests together. And then just a couple of weeks before the transplant, 4 or 5 weeks before, they said, you're at 6. You're not going to make it. You are not going to make it to the transplant date. You have to go on dialysis, basically on Monday. It was gutting, to be honest, because we'd had this whole sort of 1.5 year workup, if you like, organising and planning and all the phases and all the hoops to jump through. And I felt like, in a way, I've let myself down at the final hurdle. How haven't I made it? But yet here I was on 6, EGFR 6, going to Butlins for the weekend with all my extended family, feeling a bit tired, but essentially still operating. And so it was a bit of a I needed to be convinced that I absolutely needed to go on dialysis. But all that time we were thinking, it's 4 or 5 weeks. It's not the end of the world. Chins up, let's go for it, and we'll get to the finish line, which is the transplant date in a few weeks.
Do you think that because you weren't experiencing severe symptoms that maybe you were in denial about needing dialysis, or was it that you didn't have the understanding of how important it was?
I think a little bit of both, if I'm honest. Yeah, I was just I'd planned everything around this magical transplant date. And like everyone my mum knew she was doing it. Everyone I knew it was happening. It was like our target. And so part of me just felt like, I failed at this because I'd done so well on so little kidney function, and I'm still going, and I'm this and that and the other. And then I had to just listen to the advice and realize that is really not a good level of kidney function at all. So yeah, I got whizzed in and had to have the neckline put straight in. Again, I had no real clue what that was. 6 months earlier, they had said, would you like a fistula put in your arm just in case you don't make it to the transplant date and we do need to dialyse you? And I'd said no because, well, I'm a Christian. I prayed about it. I felt like I did not need that at that point. I knew we had this planned transplant. I felt like I had a kidney with my name on it in my mum. And also because I'm a choir conductor for my job. I don't know whether this is selfishly or not, but my arms are my job. If you don't know, listeners, what a choir conductor is, then it's the person it's like a teaching kind of role at the front of a choir or an orchestra. And your arms are your kind of instrument, if you like. You move those around, you make the music with your arms. And I felt at that time, no, I do not want a funny, bulgy arm, which was the photos I'd seen in that appointment with the nurse, because I thought that's not going to be good for my work life. So I'd said no to that 6 months before, which meant then I had to have a neckline put in. Had no real idea. Just went into the hospital the Monday morning, came out barely being able to move any of my shoulders, head, neck, but I had to go to work at 8 in the morning the next day because I committed to something, which in hindsight was a little bit silly. Didn't realise it was like a thing that goes into your heart. Or in fact, I didn't realise that till it came out, the day it came out. And in a way, like the neckline is when you do go to dialysis, once it's healed, it's like you're kind of just clicking in. It's like, when you put petrol in a car, you've got the nozzle, you've got the bit, there's something quite easy about it in that sense. But there's obviously a lot more risks with it as well, getting infections, all of which I went on to experience as well later on in dialysis.
So you didn't have a full understanding of the neckline. So how was the surgery for you? I mean, was it like a complete shock? I mean, In my experience, I was awake the whole time. Were you awake through the operation or did they do it under general?
I was awake for the whole thing. I went into hospital on my own and I'd thought I'd be getting the bus home. Mistake. I remember the whole thing. I didn't find it very pleasant because also I was under a sheet. So you've got your head kind of tilting to one side, to the opposite side of which it's being done. And then the surgeon kind of has a big sheet over you to kind of keep everywhere else clean. And then a hole over the area where they're going to be working. But that means it's quite claustrophobic. So you've got fabric right over your face. My main memory of it was I took like a stress ball squishy fidget thing in and I was just like playing with that, trying to take my mind off it. It's a bit like bee stings when they're putting a run of injections of local anesthetic all down your chest. And then you can't feel it for quite a few hours until the general anesthetic wears off. At which point I was like, yikes, this is really painful. What is this thing? Like, and I didn't realize like you wouldn't be able to sleep. It was so uncomfortable. You got like basically a couple of big plastic tubes essentially coming out the front of your chest. Of course, it's on show on quite a lot of your clothes. I hadn't really thought any of that through. But then there we were the next day. Oh, here we go. We're going to start dialysis. And again, I didn't really know like how many hours is it? How often is it? I felt a little bit ill-equipped in that area, but I went to a really nice centre in Borough and the nurses were actually all really nice. And it was like a new starters kind of set up for a couple of weeks. I did find it painful. Any tug at all on the line or anything, I found it really painful. So yeah, and kind of it's a lot to get used to, I think, in a couple of days. You go from being at Butlins in the pool to neckline in to being on dialysis every other day. And you can't miss one, you can't be late. You know, mine started really early in the morning, my sessions. So it was a lot to get used to. And I was still working. And, you know, I mentioned I've got young kids, school runs, all of that just has to kind of like continue whilst you're then somehow strapping to machine for sort of, what is it, 4, 8, 12 hours a week. And then all the toing and froing from the hospital as well. It's quite a big, like the way I described it to my friends and colleagues is like you've gained a new part-time job that you never knew you were going to have to squeeze in somehow.
So how did you balance work life, dialysis, family?
I would say it was a juggle. My amazing husband helped a lot and did like school runs. It was tricky to go straight from dialysis to work. Sometimes dialysis just gave me an absolute banging head, particularly when they would put like liquid iron straight into my bloodstream. That gave me such a bad head for the whole rest of the day. And I won't lie, it was really difficult to go to, you know, straight on from there to work. Lots of early start. I'm someone who has a high value on showing up. So I would show up, and I think it's partly a musician / performer thing. I would show up as best I could, smile on my face, energy, all those things. And of course, this time I was thinking, oh, this is only going to be for a couple of weeks. So yeah, then did that for a few weeks. So just kind of getting in the flow, getting to meet people as much as you can, chatting to the people in the bed either side. I can only imagine it's sort of a bit like jury service where you don't know who you're going to be with and you kind of get to meet a cross section of society. A couple of times the ambulance workers thought that I was a nurse. They just assumed I was working there. And then a while into dialysis, one of the ambulance workers who I'd said good morning to every morning saw me on one of the beds, dialysis, and he was like, what the heck? It's like, what are you doing? I was like, no, I'm one of the patients here. So funny moments like that. And I won't forget, you know, every other day you have to go in at like crack of dawn and stand on the weighing scales and just, oh, there's so many things where you're just like, oh, this is just a bit undignified. I'm like, yeah. And as well, being a woman, you know, having this neckline coming halfway down my chest. And then I was in a bay entirely with older men. And actually, I've got to kind of like pull my top down, half down to get to get all into dialysis. I'm sat there with half my chest out effectively. You know, there are things like that where it's like you have to almost get dialysis clothes. I mean, I'm always one for an excuse for a bit of shopping, but seriously, it was like, oh, maybe they should do a clothing line for this. But yeah, a few things like that. I would say as well, I did experience some really good care. And if there's any medical nurses, dialysis team listening to this, I would say a kind word or a smile goes a long way. Like, we see what you do long shifts, you look after people. People sometimes are not doing very well in there, and they see a lot. I think the nurses and teams who work day in, day out with people who are on dialysis. But it's amazing how, when you're chained to a bed for 4 hours, a kind word, a little conversation, a little remembered fact about your life, a little check-in about something, I found went a really long way. And the other thing I grew to love was the stack of rich tea biscuits, the cup of tea, and the soggy white toast. I lived for that at 8 a.m. That was like, broke up the time. I looked forward to that. So, yeah. So, I mean, dialysis, in my experience, it's absolutely freezing. I found myself feeling really cold all the time. I don't know whether that's just me. So I'd take loads of blankets and scarves and be literally wrapped up as warm as I could possibly be, because I just used to find it, I don't know, it made me really, really chilly. It also, more often than not, gave me really crazy cramps in my legs, which sometimes are absolutely excruciating. So I'd have to get the machine turned down a bit slower. Some of the other things I experienced, and everyone's experience will be different, and I acknowledge some of these are very minor symptoms, but my hands were very, very sensitive. So like touching paper, or I don't know why, I've not even heard of the people say that, but for me, fabrics, I couldn't fold cleaning cloths or anything because it was horrible on my hands. I don't know what that's about. My teeth were so sensitive. I couldn't drink water during a hot meal at all because my whole jaw would like be on fire. And I know now I'm not on dialysis, like all of those things are gone. So I sort of know they were definitely linked to that.
So real varied experiences of dialysis and getting your neckline. And as someone with a neckline myself, I put up screens. That's how I avoid the top tip there. Every unit should have them, but you can put up screens as well. And also, yes, a blanket is a must when you're having hemodialysis, because they're literally taking the blood out, cleaning it and putting it back in. But they do have temperature controls on that machine as well. So, yeah, they can actually make it a little bit warmer. But yes, generally, as far as I know, every hemodialysis patient feels the cold. Obviously, I haven't spoken with every single hemodialysis patient, but I know that feeling cold, definitely a blanket is an absolute must.
And a sweetie for when they're putting that weird stuff in at the end. I can't even remember what it is. But yeah, a few times when they're putting random drugs in your line and you get like a fuzzy tongue and like lips and you're like, can't speak at the end. For some reason, I had that every time. A little Werther's Original. That's nice.
You've mentioned a lot of plus points and a lot of challenges that you faced while you were on dialysis. You've also given some advice to medical professionals that I really think is so important. Like you said, it might just be a little smile. It might just be, a few kind words, but it can make such a difference to someone whose life has been completely transformed by dialysis. But what other advice do you have for somebody who's just been told that they have to have hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis?
First, I would say, I'm sorry, because it's just really tough. I'd say it's difficult. And I don't know that many people who go, oh, this is a breeze, this is totally fine, I've adjusted really quickly. But I would say it does get easier, it does get better. You do get a greater understanding of what level of dialysis you need. So actually, as it happened, when I was on dialysis in the early days, they're really making me do 4-hour blocks. But actually, I felt like it was too much because my legs were going crazy. I was getting crazy cramps. I don't know all the scientific stuff about it, but my blood pressure was then totally crashing. I was feeling super faint. And actually, I just said, is there any chance we could try 3.5 hours or 3 hours and just see, give that a try? And same, I can't remember, there were these kind of filter things on the side. And I think, when you start, you're on a small one and then it got bigger and it got bigger. And I just happened to notice that when they put me on the big one, I just felt awful. And so I said, is there any chance we could just go back a notch? Because I felt fine 2 weeks ago on that other one. And actually they adjusted. So I was on that medium filter for Sorry, I don't know all the technical language. It's all a bit of a blur, as you can tell. So, yeah, being able to just learn what levels of what kind of your body's tolerance is and not being afraid to speak up like, no, I'm in pain. No, this is giving me a banging head. No, this is making me feel really weak and like I'm going to pass out. Just speaking up for yourself, I think, is really important because it's just good to get the right balance. Of course, you want the clearance in your blood levels and things. Of course, that's why we're there. But at the same time, if they push you too far, I think, you're the one who feels the fallout from that. So, yeah, take snacks. Yeah, I mean, the whole sort of drinking limits and all of those things I found really difficult as somebody who normally drinks a lot. And I know you've done whole episodes about sort of low potassium diets and all of that. I'd highly recommend those other episodes, which I listened to when I was put on those interventions.
So you went on to have a kidney transplant. What happened next?
Yeah, so the transplant was planned for 4 or 5 weeks into dialysis. So me and my mum were really excited and looking forward to that, although some trepidation, obviously, big deal for both of us, big deal for the whole family. And we were literally had my final dialysis, said goodbye to everyone at the centre, said thank you, took in snacks for the nurses, all of that kind of thing, wished all my comrades in the dialysis unit well for the future. And then on the day of the operation, we were literally like in our gowns, kind of good to go. And then the surgeon just literally swiped his head round the curtain and went, I'm not operating today on you. And literally, we thought it was a joke. We thought it was a joke. And he said, no, your hemoglobin has taken a nosedive. Don't know why, but it has today in the results. So you can pack up your stuff and we'll have to reschedule when your hemoglobin's higher. We were gobsmacked. We had not thought that was a thing. I'd not had any previous dips in that result. So it was so weird. We just had to pack up our stuff. Me and my mum, we had moved into the ward. We had unpacked. We had things in the drawers. We were there. We had arrived in bay next to each other, like having quite a laugh up and down with the bed, and then that was it. We just had to go home. So then the next morning I found myself back at the dialysis centre, by which point I've lost my slots because they've given them to somebody else, which from being a parent is quite a nightmare because you're suddenly like, no, we had a rhythm that I just about established with my job and with my kids and with my husband so that we can keep this show on the road. Now I'm back here and they say, you might have to go to another centre. I said, I'm not going to another centre. I'm under the care of this consultant. I was literally here yesterday. I'm back here. Please, please, please. I'm begging you. Can you give me the same slots? Anyway, it took quite a while. I had to go on different days. And anyway, that all got sorted. But I didn't know at that point that it would take a further 5 months for my hemoglobin to come to an appropriate level to operate. So long story short, those 5 months were difficult because, as you know, as many of the listeners know, it's an every other day scenario, dialysis. It's Boxing Day, it's New Year's Eve, it's all of those things. It goes on and on and on, and you can't get off. Combined with that, I felt like I'd kind of let everyone down. We'd planned, I'd got cover for my job, for work. I'd got parents and in-laws to support with my kids so that my husband could come to the hospital. All of these arrangements we'd made. And then I was just back home for tea time. So it was difficult. It was really hard on my mum as well, because psychologically, she's really geared herself up. She's held fire. She's not gone on holiday. She's not gone to do all these things. She's kind of reined in her whole diary for this kind of 2-3 month recovery period. And there we were, not knowing where it would be again. So it was difficult. And I think one thing I draw out of this season looking back is that it's hard actually to have hope that it will happen when you are living through that season. And I think in that respect, I had 6-month taster of what it's like to be waiting for a deceased donor. Now, all situations are different and I don't want to compare, but all I would say is I feel the empathy now for people who are in a constant holding pattern, which is not easy to be living on dialysis without knowing if or when things are going to change. And for those people who are in that category who are listening now, and for yourself, Dee, I really sympathise with that. And well done. It's a very difficult holding pattern to be living in. But then in my own kind of personal faith as a Christian, I did feel like as Christians, we're told that God's timing is perfect. I did have the hope of that. And I'd say that that's possibly one of the only things that spurred me on to keep going. Because day in, day out, it was difficult. People are going, so when's it going to be rescheduled? So why was it cancelled? So what's your hemoglobin today? What level is this? You know, people who were meaning well, but sort of wanting to judge you on what number your blood work was that week all the time. And that was quite tiring. And I think the other thing I would warn against, and this is for people listening, perhaps who aren't in that situation, is just, I would say, I found it really hard if people went, well, at least X, Y, or Z. And I know you've done a whole episode on this podcast, which I would point people to about what not to say with people with chronic diseases or lived experience of disabilities and the like. Because I think, in a way, on dialysis, you're trying to keep your own chin up to even survive each time you go there, to just get out of bed that day, to just keep going, to keep cooking, to keep washing, keep doing all of life, to keep seeing people, to keep doing things you love. And actually, it's okay to say to somebody, I think, well, I would have appreciated people saying, that's really tough. I am sorry for you. That's a lot. Rather than what quite a lot of my experience was, in good faith, people were trying to keep my spirits up, and they would be like, well, at least you got to do that carol service that you might not have otherwise got to do if you were recovering right now. And of course, people mean really well with that. But I think it's a unique position to be on dialysis waiting for a transplant. And I think, you know, if we can all understand a little bit more the shoes that people walk in that scenario, I think that would help.
I agree 1000%. I think that, as you said, people can be very well-meaning, but what they're actually doing is minimizing what you're going through. And I think people should ask more questions that are sensitive in that. It's kind of a difficult balance even saying that, because sometimes you don't want people asking you a load of questions. So I think for me, the best thing that people can do is, number one, listen. And number two, what can I do to support you?
Right.
If people ask that question instead of any other questions, then that, for me, is the best thing that they can ask you. And then you can tell them what you need, rather than them trying to hit and miss with good intention and then cause more upset or more distress. So, I agree with you 1000%, definitely. So you had this period where you were dealing with all the emotions that went with having the surgery cancelled, having to deal with sorting out your dialysis and all the different things that you had to juggle and come to terms with the disappointment and everything that happened in that period. So how long was it before you actually did have your transplant?
So I'm really happy to say 6 months later, a week after they'd taken the roof off my house for a loft conversion.
Wow.
I'd taken all the windows off.
Oh,
good timing. I did get a call saying, we've got a new date and we think your results could be viable to go ahead. So almost a couple of days later, because you had to isolate for 10 days before, it was like, oh, lockdown vibes, isolating, but with loads of builders in my house. So slightly awkward. And I mean, amazingly, then the transplant did go ahead at the end of February in 2024. And, you know, even when we had the gowns on this time, until they wheeled my mum into theatre, we did not think it would be going ahead. We were like, let's hold it lightly. It might get cancelled again. You know, chill everybody. I didn't tell that many people because I just thought, I feel like I've let everyone down again, and this roller coaster. But we were very blessed. We had two amazing surgeons lined up on that day at Guy's Hospital and all the follow-up care. And I mean, I can't really even put into words. It's quite miraculous. It's quite crazy. It's mind-blowing that my mum goes into a surgery and then a few hours later, I roll into a surgery and they take out. I know people listening know about transplants, but I just want to say it's so bizarre and so extraordinary. They took a living piece out of my mum and opened me up and put it in, and like a new battery, I worked better again. It's daily mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing the sacrifice that my mum made to do that. It's incredible that she is fit and well and strong and healthy, age 64, with no side effect from having done it. Praise the Lord. Just amazing. And then myself, the kidney took really well straight away. And that was really encouraging. There was no rejection at all, which was just brilliant. They'd said in the workup that me and my mum had 80% DNA match, which was quite funny because I've grown up and everyone's always said, you're so like your dad. You look like your dad. You act like your dad. And then we realised I've got 80% DNA match with my mum. This is really funny. So I'm obviously getting more like her now. I've got one of her organs inside me. I won't lie. For some reason, I always hadn't concentrated much in some of the pre-workup meetings or something, but I didn't really know where they were putting the kidney in. So when I saw my stomach, how they cut it open and how bruised it was, I seen nothing like it, Dee, before. It was quite a shock. So that all went really well. The only side effect I have, which wasn't anticipated, is that it became apparent a couple of hours back on the ward that my whole right leg was entirely paralysed.
Oh
and
my
I couldn't,
gosh.
yeah, I couldn't feel it or move it from anything below the scar, my whole hip, my knee, my thigh, my calf, my foot, my toes. I couldn't move any of it. It was really peculiar. And the doctors are coming around saying, oh, we maybe see this once every 10 years. We're not really sure what's happened here. Anyway, a couple of days are going by and I've still got no movement or feeling in it. So that was tough as well because nobody could give me the reassurance that it would come back because nobody knew what had gone wrong. And the hospital obviously leapt on it and were doing all the right tests and things. But even that was quite full on because you just had a major abdominal surgery. And then things like they're trying to get you in the chair to sit up because that's good for the recovery for the surgery, but really terrible for you to try and hop, carrying all of the drains and all the catheters and all the things with zero function of one of your legs when you're not meant to be lifting anything and you're trying to lift your dead leg on and off the bed. It was difficult. It made the recovery really quite difficult. And there was a night in hospital where I thought, oh my goodness, am I going to walk again? I've come in here for a new kidney and I'm going out without one of my legs working. So that was quite unexpected. And I understand that to be a very rare side effect. It took quite a few weeks. So I had one of the things which made the stay in hospital quite challenging was going for a lot of other checkups that were about my leg or about nerves. So yeah, I had a few difficult days of being even transported chaotically to other hospitals to have tests, which just when you've been just completely cut in half and you're trying to rest and recover, going on an ambulance ride around Southeast London over speed bumps is not what you need. And it was really difficult. But can I share with you my favourite moment of being in the hospital? One night, these amazing volunteers came round and said, hello, would anyone like to go to the cinema tonight? And at this point, I've been in there about 8 or 9 days. And I was like, yes, please. But I said, but I can't get off the bed. They said, we've got volunteers. We're going to come and collect you in your bed tonight and we're going to take you to the Medi Cinema. Honestly, day made. After days and days of hearing other people's procedures in the wards and like other crises and just the drama of it all, going to the cinema in bed was a massive highlight. So not all bad.
So they literally wheeled you in the bed to the cinema?
The whole bed came to the cinema.
Wow.
All my drugs, everything came to the cinema. So that was really fun.
I mean, I can't imagine like having to deal with the recovery from having the operation itself and then having to deal with being paralyzed on top of that. How did you get your head around that? What helped you cope with that situation?
I'd say one thing that helped me cope was listening to music. So I'm a musician. I absolutely love music. A lot of the time in my normal life when I'm working, I don't listen to a lot of music because I'm doing music so much that then it's like takes over my brain space if I'm cooking and I'm trying to listen to music or I'm driving and the radio's on. But actually, it was such a blessing listening, like for me, particularly to worship music in the middle of the night. I felt like the words had fresh relevance. I was listening to it in a new way. I was clinging on to the hopes that were sung about in gospel music. And it was really powerful. I remember though, one night, it was like 3 a.m. You just don't get any sleep in hospital. Those who've spent time in hospital will thoroughly relate to this. There's beeping going on. There's lights being turned on. There's people having dramas. Sometimes you're one of those people having a drama. And so I put my earbuds in, I put some worship music on, and it was this really upbeat song, and it was going, as long as I'm breathing, I got a reason to praise. And I was like, no, do you know what? I'm cross. It's 3 a.m. I cannot sleep. Now I've put some music on. It's so upbeat. And then I thought, hang on a minute. Correct. As long as I'm breathing, I got a reason to praise the Lord. And I thought, am I breathing? I am breathing. Can I move my leg? No. Have I had a massive surgery? Yes. But I am alive, and I'm alive because of this transplant. And there's always something to give thanks for. So yeah, that's one of the things that really got me through. And particularly, like, sorry to bang on about my church and my faith, but honestly, if you've been in a bit of a near-death situation, I don't know how people get through it without this. People are really praying for me. People were really in my church, in my like group of women that I meet with. People were just really kind, messaging me, praying for me, thinking of me, sending in little cards or like little treats. It was amazing. There was like a wave of kindness. So yeah, that was awesome. And physio. So yeah, chocolate, physio. These were music. These are my coping mechanisms.
So how long was it before you got full function back?
So I came out of hospital with a Zimmer frame, which aged me by about 50 years. It took a good 8 weeks to be able to feel more of my leg and move my leg. Then after about 2 months, I didn't need the Zimmer frame. I just had a walking stick. The main problem was my knee area because I couldn't feel, my knee was sort of the last place to come back. So it just gave way, which if you're recovering from major surgery is so dangerous because within a second, you're just on the floor. It happened to me a few times in the hospital when I'm being encouraged to walk to the toilets, but you're going to the toilet so often because they're putting like 5 litres of fluid through you every 24 hours minimum. You're going to the loo every 20 minutes, every 25 minutes, and it takes me about 5 minutes to walk there, 5 minutes to walk back. I might as well set off for the next trip, you know. It was a bit crazy. So, yeah, it did take quite a few months. I would say probably about 8 or 9 months for it to feel like I could do sport on it again, for example. So it was quite a long recovery. I took the physio and the neurophysio really seriously. I set my alarm at 6:30 every morning, and I jolly well did the exercises that the doctors told me to do. I think a lot of that kind of recovery, it's not, as the physio said, Rachel, you're not going to get use of your leg back entirely by your mindset. Having a good attitude is good, but you just need to put the work in. You need to do what you're told and put the work in. So that's what I did. I thought, I've only got one shot here to get this functioning again. So yeah, it's taken, you know, as I'm now 10 months post-transplant, you know, occasionally it has a flicker and I still don't have any feeling underneath my scar or around that area. But I understand some of that is normal. And it kind of came down to it being accidental nerve damage.
So is the accidental nerve damage what caused you to be paralyzed, or are you talking specifically about your scar?
Yeah, so the accidental nerve damage was either during the surgery or due to the positioning for the surgery. Because I think that surgery was 5 or 6 hours long. And they concluded that whilst they couldn't see a damaged nerve on my MRI scans, that was the logical reason given where I could and couldn't feel and yeah, that kind of thing.
So how is life post-transplant? You've been given this wonderful gift by your mom. What difference has that kidney made to you?
The new kidney has made a big difference to me. I'm back kind of firing on all cylinders, I would say. I said at the start, I'm quite a full-on character person. I'm driven, I'm determined, I work hard, I go the extra mile, particularly for the charity that I've set up. And it's good to be able to kind of live life in the fast lane again. I think the culmination for me was, given the leg scenario and the transplant, I'd said for my 40th birthday, which was kind of 9 months post-transplant, that I wanted to go skiing. That was my target. And so on New Year's Day, 2025, I was skiing down the French Alps and free from dialysis, free from the hospital, although I go most weeks still, just because of a couple of other sort of follow-up bits. But really grateful, I think, living with a fresh appreciation for all of the things that I can enjoy in life, particularly bananas and tomatoes. I'm sorry to anybody on dialysis who's, you know, having to avoid all those foods at the moment. There's a freedom that comes back that you didn't necessarily appreciate that you'd lost. So I think as well, there's a sense of second chance, which is really, really precious. So yeah, very, very grateful to my amazing mum.
I know that you're very active on social media. So for anyone who wants to follow you, what are your handles?
Yeah, I do love a bit of social media, and you can find me on Rachel Joy Staunton.
And as always, I will put the links to Rachel's social media in the description box. What is your final word of encouragement for the listeners?
I would say keep going, keep running the race, and take every good moment, really appreciate it, enjoy it. None of us are promised the next day, so let's live life to the full. Do what you're called to do, make the best of situation as best you can, and let's be an encouragement to one another in the same way, Dee, you have been over these many podcasts to me. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for the advice and the encouragement that you shared. And I know that this will help so many people out there. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. I truly appreciate your support. New episodes of this podcast are released every other Monday, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you found this episode helpful, why not share it with someone who might benefit too? To stay up to date with the latest episodes, news and resources, sign up for the email mailing list and join the WhatsApp channel. All the details are in the episode description. Until next time, take care and choose to live.